Sweet in the morning, oh Lord, it's sweet in the morning. Sweet in the morning. Audrey Hendricks for the Birmingham Civil Rights Institute's Oral History Project. I'm Dr. Horace Huntley. We're at Miles College. Today is June 1st, 1995. Welcome, Ms. Hendricks.
Thank you.
And thank you for taking time out of your schedule to come and sit with us today. I just want to start by asking some general kinds of questions about your family. Where were your parents from? Are they originally from Birmingham?
My mother is from Birmingham, is a native of Birmingham. My father is a native of Bowling Green, Alabama, which is in Greene County.
I see. Where were you born?
I was born in Birmingham.
You were born in Birmingham. How many brothers and sisters?
There's two of us. I'm the oldest of two girls.
Okay. Tell me just a bit about your the education of your parents. How much schooling did they have?
My mother finished Booker T. Washington Business College, and my father did not complete elementary school, being in a rural township.
Right. What were their occupations?
My father was a laborer. He worked for Jim Dandy at the time, and my mother worked for Alexander and Company with the Black Insurance Company at that time, doing clerical kinds of things.
Okay. Tell me about your education. Where did you start school? Did you start at Center Street?
Started at Center Street. I went there for 4 years, and after the 4 years, I went to private school to Our Lady of Fatima. After desegregation, went to Ramsey High School, and I left Birmingham in '71 and went to Bishop College in Dallas, Texas, and came back to Birmingham for a while in the '80s and went to UAB and took some courses toward my master's.
Tell me, so you went to Fatima. Was that high school?
Our Lady of Fatima at that time was an elementary school. It was Immaculata. Okay. Initially, Immaculata was no more, and it ended up being an elementary school. And the children who were at Our Lady of Fatima on 14th Street South at that time were then moved down to what was known then as Immaculata High School. Right. And that's where I started with them for the last, well, I should say 5th through 8th grade.
Yeah. Describe to me what it was like going to Ramsey to high school. What year did you go to Ramsey?
I started there in '71. When I went to Ramsey High School, it was immediately right after desegregation, well, whenever they decided to start letting black children go to high school. I remember for the first 2 weeks, we all sat in the auditorium because they didn't quite know what to do with us.
You mean the black kids sat in the auditorium?
Ramsey had it set up at that time where children, before the school term would end, say like now in May of '95, they would have already elected what courses they would take for the upcoming fall term. So what they had to do was to get us situated in classes, and I guess basically find out what do we do with these children that have just shown up here based on what the laws are now.
Today, in order to get into Ramsey, you had to take a test.
Yes.
Was there a test at that time?
It was a public school. From my understanding, I think at that time it's an alternative school now, and I think what they've done is gone back to the concept that they had then. During the times that I was there, I went to school with Bruno's children, the Salem's children that owned the restaurant. So, you know, I knew those children.
Well, how were you accepted in those years that you were at Ramsey? In the
initial stage of it, we had to us as black children had to kind of bind together as friends. It was very difficult. There was some hatred among children, whites against blacks and vice versa. I guess for some of us, I witnessed some fights of the two races, some name calling, not a whole lot, but just little things that would happen during the school years. But as my graduation, it got a little bit better at the fourth year.
Ramsey probably was desegregated maybe as early as 66 or so. Is that right? 66, 67? So you were not the first class.
I was not the first class that I'm aware of.
But all of the black kids were placed in the auditorium at the beginning of the year.
In 71.
That's very interesting. What do you remember most about Ramsey?
I think the thing that I remember most about Ramsey, again, is the friendships, the togetherness that we had.
Between the blacks and the whites?
Primary blacks and blacks. I think that for blacks and white, it gave me an appreciation or understanding, I guess, of dealing with another culture. Prior to that, I had been based in just my culture. And in going to Ramsey, it helped me understand some things that are just innate in people and cultures that you may not have known prior to mixing with other races.
Like what, for instance?
Well, one thing I think was temperature, something as simple as that. We tend in the winter to be very cold natured and want to put on a lot of clothes. I found that we would always have big arguments about, let the window down. The whites would always say, it's too hot in here, and we would always think it would be comfortable, or popping rubber bands at girls or hitting them real hard. And a lot of times you didn't have boys that would just physically lash out and that kind of thing at black girls to show playfulness at that time.
Right. Okay. So there were differences in terms of sort of cultural differences.
Yes.
Tell me a bit about the community that you lived in. What community did you live in?
I lived in Titusville is what they call that area, which is the southwest side off of 6th Avenue South and Center Street.
How would you describe the community?
The community was mixed. We had school teachers, we had business persons. I lived across the street from Paul Harris, who works with Protective Industrial for years. Primarily some doctors in the community and general laborers. We had people that had worked at a SIPCO and plants like that.
So you mean mixed in terms of economic status? Yes. Racial makeup?
Was predominantly black.
Was it predominantly black or is it all
100%.
black? Okay. What do you remember in terms of recreation in the community?
The only recreation that we had at that time was Memorial Park, which was not very far from where I lived.
Do you have any idea of what was your perception of your community's relationship to the Birmingham Police Department?
None really. If there were break-in, you would see policemen and something of that nature, and that was very rare that anything would happen, but nothing where they just came through the community and harassing about it, to my recollection.
What did you do after high school?
I left Birmingham and moved to Dallas, Texas, and went to college there for 4 years.
To what school?
Bishop College.
Bishop College. And after college, did you come back to Birmingham?
Now, I lived in Dallas for the next 4 years, and I worked in mental health for Dallas County Mental Health and Retardation, and worked with children there with the emotional problems in a residential setting.
Why did you decide to come back to Birmingham?
Well, I decided that I had been there long enough, and I just wanted to kind of come back home. Just drew me back home after a while.
That attraction of home. Huh?
Yes.
Yes. Tell me a little about your involvement in the Civil Rights Movement. How and why did you get involved in the Civil Rights Movement?
Well, for me, it was no way for me not to really be involved. My parents were involved from the point that I could remember. My mother was Assistant Secretary of the Alabama Christian Movement. My father had gone to jail for riding on the bus. My church was involved. It was just no way around it. You were there and you're just a part of it. So that's how I got involved.
So you were simply surrounded by it. You were, in fact, a child of the movement.
Yes. And some people, sometimes when you look on the media, talk shows that they have now, where they have people talk about what kind of people that came through your home. It wasn't rare for me to see Fred Shuttlesworth, to come to my home. It wasn't rare for Dr. King to maybe come by sometimes. So those people I remember as a child.
What was that like to be in the presence of Shuttlesworth, a King, people that win the news an awful lot?
Well, at that age, it's just someone coming by. And again, being a child, you don't really understand until like now. It's like, wow, these people I knew and were in my home.
Right. You attended the mass meetings.
Yes.
Can you describe to me what the typical mass meeting was like from the perspective of a child? What age are we talking about? How old were you when you...
Well, I was finally arrested. I was 8 years old, so from the inception I had been in the movement all the time. Whenever they began, as far as I know, when they began mass meetings, I was there.
You were there.
Because of my mother and father. I don't ever remember a time that we were not in the meeting, whether or not... Initially, we were started at 16th Street, from what I can remember, and later, as it grew, they ended up having two meetings where they had the adults, and then meetings where they had the children.
You mean mass meetings? Where you'd have a meeting for the adults and a meeting for the children?
Because we had outgrown 16th Street, so there would end up being two places. And remember Andy Young and some of them being part of the mass meetings where the younger people would be. And I think in my mind it had to be because of this... it was just so many people, and then we had packed 16th Street out, and so the children became involved in it, and that's how we ended up there. But the meetings themselves were, in my mind, from what I could remember, was energy, was very organized. People responded. I remember times when they would say, if we're going to march tomorrow, if you have any weapons, come down and put them on the table, and there would be people who would come down and put knives on the table, and those kind of things. So it was a great impact. It was just...
Were these younger people that...
Different ages, depending on which meeting that I would go to. Sometimes...
So you could actually attend either meeting, the adult meeting or the children's meeting. How were the two meetings different?
There was not any difference in the meetings. Same kind of thing where there was singing, there was strategies. They talked about what would happen if you're going to march. Well, not per se what would happen, but if you had decided that you were going to march, that you did not need to take weapons. This is a nonviolent organization, and they stressed that very strongly, that this is nonviolence involved in it.
There were, I know in the adult meetings, there were many testimonies that were given about what people were experiencing. Did you have the same kind of testimony? Were these done by younger people?
Teenagers primarily, people maybe in high school or college age persons at that time, or sometimes adults. It would be mingled, but you would find that children with teens and young adults and maybe my age would be more prone to draw to that church where they were organized there. But you could go to either one. It was not separate per se. It was where we chose to be at the time.
Were Birmingham police present at the meetings?
If they were not dressed in their uniforms for me to know that there were police around.
But if they were, they would have been white. So were there whites in the meetings?
Not that I ever remember seeing.
You were arrested.
I was arrested.
What were the circumstances of your arrest?
Well, I had gone to a mass meeting one particular night, and when I went home, I just told my mother and father that was something that I wanted to do, and they told me, okay. And
you told them that you wanted to go to jail? And they agreed?
They agreed.
So what happened? Where were you?
When I told my parents.
No, I assume you were at home when you told
I was at home when I told my parents.
That was the night after
one of the mass meetings, and during the day I went to see my grandparents on my mother's side, my grandparents on my father's side, and whoever was there to tell me I was going to jail. And I remember telling the teacher, we went by the school, and she cried. And
oh, you mean you left home that morning and you went to the school?
I was just kind of telling people what I was going to do, and I remember the teacher crying about it, and I think she was just touched by the whole thing.
Do you remember the teacher? What teacher
Miss B.P. Wills.
Miss B.P. Wills. What grade were you?
I would have been at that time in the third grade, fourth grade teacher.
How long did you remain in jail?
2 weeks.
2 weeks. And you were 8?
8 years old.
Can you describe to me what happened during the arrest? What were you marching?
We marched from 16th Street, and I think that we got to the next block where Booker T. Washington and Wynn Radio is now. We got halfway the block, and they put us in a paddy wagon, and they took us to Juvenile Hall. And in my remembrance now, that apparently right after I was arrested, that must have been a big thrust when so many other people were arrested, and they ended up at the fairgrounds, because you would get news sometimes that there's no more room here, and they're now putting people out at the fairgrounds because there's no other jails. They were all filled. But they arrested me. I went in a paddy wagon. The first day, we went into this room that looked like a classroom, and the children, all of us sat in there for a while, and there was not any harassment or anything of any people there. I remember later on, I don't know if it was the same day or some days later, I went into maybe a conference room where there were whites that was asking questions about the movement. And in my mind now, I was wondering whether or not they were trying to find out was anything communistic in
Were these policemen?
They did not have a uniform.
Clothes.
You're right. They were plain clothes people. And they would ask what went on in the meetings. What kinds of things they talk about, and I responded that we talked about nonviolence and discrimination and that kind of thing, and whether or not that they thought that they were telling us anything about overthrowing the government, and of course not. And that was about it. The rest of the time, you were just there. And
were you inside or outside?
I was inside. Where we slept at night and during the day, it was like a dormitory setting. The rooms had bunk beds, and it was one on top of the other. It may have been where it could hold, and I'm estimating maybe 15 to 20 people tops.
Were these all girls?
All girls.
In one area and the boys in another
Exactly.
area? What did you do during the day?
During the day, we would go outside, maybe they had like a recreational area outside. There was no classes per se to keep up any of your academics, so you just there, basically.
So the morning that you had decided should be arrested, your parents took you to school.
Right, to let Miss Wills
To
know.
let them know, and then they took you down to the church.
Well, we went by my family's home
your family's.
to let them know, and then we went to the church.
What were your family's reaction?
Well, my father's family, brothers were all really involved in the movement. Well, not all, but a large majority of them were involved. So it was like, okay, we're very proud of you, that kind of thing. So there was no one that was upset negatively about it.
Were there others of your age there at the time?
In
Were
jail,
arrested? Yes.
I think that there were a few others. I didn't know them personally, but I understand from reading that there were others that may have been as young as I was.
Yeah. What does an 8-year-old think about when they're in jail for 2 weeks?
At that time, I thought that I was just part of the cause, that I was helping the cause. In my mind, I could understand injustice, and I think that I could understand that because of the recollection of maybe the first meeting that made an impact to me was, I think Shelley Stewart at that time was at the meeting, and they were talking. You could just feel the people's emotions. I guess that's what, and you could just tell this person is serious about this. This is something
What
going on.
do you remember about Shelley Stewart?
He was just talking about the injustices and how we should not be treated the way that we were. And after they talked for a while, then they had a demonstration. This elderly man was part of the demonstration, and I witnessed a dog attacking him, and it was like, oh my God. No.
So you did see the dogs,
Yes.
the water hoses?
Did not ever see the water hoses. That was the one thing that I remember.
Yeah. How did that impact you?
I thought that it was awful at the time. In my mind, I had witnessed the beginning where somebody was just talking to people, then you go out and all you want to do is march, and it's something that's nonviolent. And I didn't understand about the permits, of course, as a child then, but I didn't see anything wrong as a child to be able to march in a group to say, I don't like what's going on, and then you're going to put a dog on me.
How near was the dog to you physically?
I wasn't very close. I was close enough. Maybe I would say
But the man was
half a block.
not near you. You just
No,
saw it from a
I saw
distance.
it from a distance.
That's really amazing to have a child, talk about it from the perspective of a child of 6 to 8 years old, and how, in fact, that impacted you at the time. Did that have anything to do with the way that you perceived white people as a result of your participation in the movement?
You mean negatively?
Yes.
No, not at the time. It did not. I guess in a child's mind, you have not experienced the kind of injustices that my parents probably had. But just the incident with the gentleman, I could understand that was wrong.
Were you aware of the colored fountains, the boards on the buses? Any of those things that were just vividly displayed?
Not vividly. I do remember when I say about the buses, I don't remember the boards on the buses. I do remember the fountains when we would shop. Sometime I would go with my grandmother to shop. But I didn't ever have any incidences of any encounters, I guess.
Right. What church were you a member of?
New Pilgrim Baptist Church.
And New Pilgrim, of course, was very actively involved. Your pastor was very involved.
Yeah.
You said your family, in fact. I know your mother and father
And
were
my
involved.
father had some brothers that were arrested as well, a couple of brothers.
As you said, you had no other alternatives there.
Right.
Tell me, after this is over, after you're released from jail, what was the reception when you returned to school? Do you remember?
Had to have been fine. I don't remember anybody teasing me, if that's what you mean, or giving me a hard time about it. Life just continued as it was before I went to jail. I had no problems with my peers or the teachers or.
Well, did they look at you as a hero or a shero?
I don't think that they really understood. Some people.
The teacher that cried. Do you remember after you returned anything about it?
No, not anything. I think that at the time she had pretty much expressed in her tears.
Were there other times, the movement continued, of course, after the demonstrations, and in September of '63, the year that you were arrested, of course, the bombing of the 16th Street Baptist Church took place. Do you remember that?
Yes.
What do you remember about it?
I remember Denise McNair.
Oh, you knew her? What were the emotions of the times when that happened?
I was shocked. She was a year older than I was.
Did she go to Center Street?
She went to Center Street. My mother was a teacher at Center Street at that time.
Okay.
I remember after her death, I think that they had the polio vaccines that they would give you in the sugar cubes, and you had to go to Center Street to get them. And after her death, I remember them bringing her to the school to get her, I guess, the sugar cubes, and how people had to just kind of hold her up. She was just that distraught over losing her child. I think at that time Denise may have been the only child.
You mean the mother?
The mother, yes,
Yes,
Denise's mother. May have been the only child at that time that she had had, and I remember that as a child.
Turbulent times. Were you involved after that, as you went on into junior high school and high school, were you involved at all in any of the...
Not particularly. There were there was one guy that went to Ramsey with me whose sister sang in the Alabama Christian Movement Choir, and I remember him because they were rehearsing how we would see each other when my father was in the choir as well as his sister, and we would see each other there, and he was really the only person I really knew other than some of my friends that grew up in the neighborhood, that we would talk a lot because we had that common bond with the movement of any of the other friends that I had.
What accomplishments did you see as a child that took place as a result of the movement?
I think the biggest accomplishments was at the beginning was jobs for adults. From that, I know that my mother was able to leave Alexander and Company and work for the federal government, which she would have not been able to prior to the demonstrations. In my just in the community itself, you could see people moving up and being able to have better jobs, being able to go to the restaurants that you had never been able to go to before, that you could only kind of look out, I guess, outside through the window. The school, for me, being able to go to Ramsey, whereas it had not been available to me and anybody else that wanted to go. So just an abundance of things that had not been before. And I think that it has helped relationships for blacks and whites in some aspects.
When you were away from Birmingham and you were meeting other people and they found out you were from Birmingham, what were their reactions?
I guess in some instances the same way that it is now when you say that you're from the South, that people have these preconceived notions about everybody lives in shotgun houses or we're on the farm. I don't think at that time that a lot of people was into the history of Birmingham. Didn't ask me a lot of questions about, how were you involved? What did you all do?
They did not ask you any questions about?
No. Not a
Were
lot.
there others at Bishop from Birmingham or others in Dallas?
No, just myself.
Oh, okay.
At that time that I knew, I met people later that were from there, but no one that I knew prior to going.
But did you have any difficulty in returning to Birmingham? I know many people who've left Birmingham say, well, they left Birmingham and they'd never come back. Was that ever a problem for you?
No, not at all.
Yeah. You always, one of the things that sort of strikes me is that I always considered myself coming back to Birmingham eventually, even during the days of segregation. I'd said that I was going to leave and I was going to come back. But as I told people that I was coming back, they'd always say, "Why? Why are you going back to Birmingham? Did that happen at all to you?"
No, not at all.
No one questioned
why would I go back to Birmingham? None. No.
That's interesting. Is there anything else that you'd like to add that we've not dealt with in relationship to your participation and how you felt as a child and the kinds of things that you were involved in and how you related to other people, or even how it is that experience impacted upon your life long term?
The only other thing that I did not talk about that I did think about as I was sitting here, and we always talk about the part where we always talk about what the whites did not do, but there were people that did do things to help and assist. And I remember one year when it was near Christmas time, and I think that there must have been a boycott going on of the stores where they were not to buy things. And I remember people shipping toys down to Birmingham from other states, so the children could have toys. And I remember as a child to see all these toys, and they came to my home, some of the things did, and to have to get rid of them, of course, because you couldn't keep them all for yourself. But, just to know that there were people who did care, who were not black, who were white people, who were with the cause. And
so people were sending toys to your address, and then
they were
your parents had to
distributed
distribute them to other
yeah, to other children because of the boycott, and they wanted children to have a Christmas who were really interested in it. And I guess at the overall picture, when I just see people, just black people in general, walking down the street in their suits and ties, and you kind of say, I had a part in that.
That's right. That's right. Well, I certainly appreciate your taking the time out today to come out and talk with us, because your perspective from that tender age is so vitally important for what we're attempting to do.
Okay.
And we will view this, and we may want to talk with you again.
Okay.
Thank you again.
All right. Thank you.
Sweet in the morning. Oh.